Hi, it's Ben from Silver Cloud. Now, at Silver Cloud, we do get to meet lots of interesting people within the HCM space. So we thought that we would record a number of very informal interviews to just talk to these people about the interesting things that are happening within their worlds. Now, the first interview that we're doing is with a friend and former colleague of mine, Mike Hadlow. Now, Mike joined a company called Silk Road right at the beginning of the first lockdown in April. Now, ironically, Silk Road actually provide onboarding, talent management and e-learning platforms. So I really just spent a bit of time chatting to Mike about how the organization supported him when arguably it was at a time when everyone was still trying to get to grips with both the pandemic and the new way of working, how he was onboarded effectively, how he got to meet his colleagues, how he got to feel engaged with the organization, and how he was brought up to speed. And obviously, most importantly, we also chatted about how he's dealing with the situation that we all still find ourselves in now. Enjoy. So, good afternoon, everyone. I'm delighted to welcome Mr. Mike Hadlow of Silk Road. And we are here to really just have a very brief conversation about Mike's experiences during the first lockdown when he was onboarded by Silk Road. And we've been discussing this, Mike, for a couple of weeks, and obviously it's quite timely now because we're now about to likely go into a second lockdown, and I guess arguably we're all a little bit resigned to it, and probably as an organisations we're probably better prepared, but we've got that feeling again. But I know it was back in March, it was all a big shock to everyone, and myself and Mike, we've known each other for quite a while. I don't know, 6-7 years.
I think that's quite conservative. I think probably about that and a bit more maybe.
Yeah, during our days at Access, we've had some good times together, which has been great. And funny enough, last time I saw Mike was at Learning Technologies in February this year. Yeah. And it was interesting because at that time COVID was kind of in the background, and I remember even one of the stands were kind of doing learning materials at the exhibition about how to deal with COVID, but it was still kind of a bit far off, didn't it? It felt like someone else's problem, I think.
It didn't feel as real as it got very soon afterwards, that's for sure.
Yeah. So, and then of course, not long after that, you joined Silk Road, and I think if I remember, you pretty much joined on the day of lockdown, right? Or there or thereabouts.
Very close to it. I remember I'd been in, well, everyone had been in lockdown for, I think it was probably a couple of weeks of proper home working, just as all of this really sort of kicked off, and going through what you normally expect when you sort of come up to start a new organisation. All of those things, all of those many conversations sort of started to happen in the background, but you almost felt like, yeah, well, it'll be fine in a couple of weeks, and then we sort of carry on. But we were always then, from pre-start to start, and then 7 months later now, carried on in the same environment.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, I think we all thought it was going to be a sort of, definitely a shorter term issue. And obviously we're all learning that it's going to be a lot longer, and we're going to have to adapt accordingly. I just want to sort of, as a first question, just get an idea. Obviously, we want to learn about your experiences. Is that it's hard enough when you join a new company. You've got those nervousness feelings and trepidation, excitement, and the first thing you want to do when you join a company is meet people and really throw yourself into the culture. So what was it like obviously as you were waiting to join and this was all happening in the background, so sort of almost like the run up to starting with Silk Road, what did that feel like to you?
Yeah, and to be fair, I'm sure there's all sorts of different people out there with different experiences, of maybe those who have joined multiple companies throughout their career, others who have been with that one company forever. I was more in that sort of category, to be honest with you. So that whole feeling of new job sort of vibes that you might tend to get normally, obviously it was really exciting, but at the same time it almost felt a little bit surreal at the same time. So some of the things that started to happen that you'd always heard about, so things like being introduced to the new team before starting, that was really important. I think sort of making arrangements for how things were going to work, and sort of understanding a little bit about some of what would be happening in the first couple of weeks to a month beforehand was helpful. But yeah, it was more excitement than anything else, even though we were sort of always going to be stuck in this little world that we're in.
Yeah, because it's kind of like, if you sort of bring yourself forward to that first day, it's kind of it's a strange feeling, because obviously, yeah, you've got that excitement of joining the new role, but then you just don't have that physical experience of just diving into it. And I know that obviously we know Colin, who works as your EMEA director, so that must have helped, having Colin there potentially as a kind of familiar face.
It absolutely helped. Like yourself, Ben, there's people out there that you can just have a natural conversation with and say what's on your mind in order to help things happen. If you're starting completely cold at a new company and perhaps don't know anybody, I've got a lot of sympathy for people in that situation where, say, everybody's new. It'd be very difficult to imagine what that would be like. And where Colin was really good, he knew how the process works at Silk Road, and helping me get in touch with the right people and build up that team, because when you've worked somewhere for a long time, I always had, if I needed something, or if I wanted to get something done, I know who the go-to people were. Here it's all of those, and anyway, having all of those people in the right places in sort of your mental folder, that's the real key to being able to do stuff quickly. So I've got to say that Colin and a couple other people in the team as well have been fantastic. So whether that's sitting in on a team call that I don't necessarily need to be on, but sitting on there so that I know some of the things that happen, some of the terminology, it's simple things like that you sort of think you know. But when you work at a company and they do have, everyone has their own ways of doing things, having those conversations and sort of listening to how they happen, that's some of the secret stuff that lets you say the difference between getting started and being productive in, say, 2 months to bringing it right down to being productive maybe in the first few weeks, because that was big for me. And I know we've got some similarities, and I like to be doing stuff, and when you can't physically do those things in person, shake somebody's hand, probably can't do that for a while either, to be fair, but make those connections, it at least helps that you can then sort of not piggyback but join in to other people's teams calls. I know they're a pain. I'm sure everyone's fatigued of meeting people like this, but if you've got a team environment and people doing stuff, even if you're not participating, that would be the big thing I would recommend as part of that experience.
Because I suppose, I think we're fairly similar as well in terms of like our characters and stuff. And, obviously going from a familiar company where you were for some years, and, at Access, there's lots of great people there. We made lots of great friends. And when things are going all a bit wrong everywhere else, it's nice to have that familiarity and those relationships in place. And I suppose, starting with a new company with new people, new processes, kind of at the point where everything else is all a bit strange as well, it can be a bit unnerving. We do share some things, because obviously I started with a new company, but it was a lot further on. It was like last month, so we had all kind of got used to dealing with this outside world. So even though I joined a new company and I found the virtual onboarding experience kind of odd, but again, did their best, and they put some really good initiatives in place to make sure that I felt welcome. And you talked about that time to readiness. I think for me, the rest of the world was slightly less strange, but for you were right in the middle of this kind of whirlwind, weren't you?
It was if you could have timed it so that it happened in such a dramatic series of events, that would have been the way to do it. But it was, I can't ask for any more of the way that the team helped out. And in realistically the last few months, that's now starting to pay dividends, because I'm being able to contribute in a way that I feel like I should be, and I'm sure you'd be in the same boat as well. And perhaps when sort of you've had a really good welcome experience over there with the team. So I feel like, although there's that first few weeks, months of getting yourself properly up to scratch and happy and confident, that then flows really nicely, and it's a really satisfying feeling, even though you're doing it within the confines of your own house, which is very strange.
Yeah. So in terms of Silk Road, one of their specialities is providing onboarding solutions. That's one of the things that they obviously do really well. So how did they use that? You kind of touched on it on an earlier answer, but how did they use that knowledge and the platform that they have to make sure that you did have a really good engaging onboarding experience, essentially practicing what they preach?
Yeah, and I think, to be fair, I'd always had my own vision of what onboarding should look like from previous experiences, and it's part of what we've always spoken about. But I think the difference is taking something that's traditionally a little bit transactional, in that it can sometimes be seen as a list of things that need to happen in order, and then you tick them off, and then that's your onboarding done. That's entirely not the point at all. So being able to combine what is essentially any platform of doing stuff and seeing things, to be able to go and help myself at my own pace, that was very important. But not just doing onboarding as an activity isolated on its own was really big. So combining things like being able to give and receive feedback and network with people, so that onboarding just isn't happening in isolation. That was a massive thing. And I had a lot to learn about the company. So being able to recommend me some things to do, whether that's transactional, how to use our systems, whether that's learning about our products, all of the sort of thing that just needs to happen, but not just thinking about it from a getting me started, here's some equipment, here's a laptop, here's a phone sort of conversation. Here's all of the things that you need to take into consideration as part of a bigger picture. That was huge. And the big part of the absolute number one was all around the socialization of being onboarded. So as in, here is your immediate team and you'll know them really quickly. But as Silk Road are an international company, here's all the different teams in the different time zones. Here's an invite for you to go and talk to this person because you'll need to do that, and just sort of having those thoughts for the person before they have to go and work them out themselves the long way. That's really the difference.
And I suppose that plays into what you said earlier, which is really important about trying to build those relationships effectively in isolation, but build those relationships quickly so that you can, it helps you obviously enable yourself, but also feel part of the organization.
Absolutely.
Yeah, okay.
Yeah, really big for us. And I think from a combined team working point of view, the calls you have with people, if you've never had that interaction before, they're often quite sterile. But if you've had that experience with person, you've had that introduction, you know a little bit about their family, about what they like to do, it helps things flow. Where if you're in an office in a location, the first thing you talk about isn't normally work. You normally sort of ask how they're doing.
Yeah.
On a Teams call, they're often very structured and you've got an agenda. So you tend to sort of, after the first 10 seconds, jump straight into work. But with that sort of socialization part of it, you've at least got an awareness of what the team are all about, and you can sort of go into those conversations a lot more comfortably, and it just tends to flow that way. That was
yeah, that's good. Yeah, and I think it's something we try and do here at Silver Cloud is we have just social team meeting calls and we're a smaller company, so it's a bit easier. And probably the last thing you want to jump on is another Teams meeting, but it is just 20 minutes, 30 minutes on a Thursday for us just to catch up and talk about that stuff that you would if you bumped into people in the kitchen. And it's kind of nice, just helps understand what people are going through, stuff that's happening outside of work, I think is key. So moving on from your personal experiences, and obviously you're certainly in the right kind of solution offering to be constantly having these conversations with companies that are probably thinking of all different ways to onboard and manage their talent. How do you think the market's changed in the last 6 or 7 months? From knowing that this is probably something that had to be done transactionally to probably having to think a little bit more about it holistically because everyone's remote working.
Yeah, we could go on about this for quite a while. Safe to say it has changed a fair bit. We at the start, so not long after I joined, people were still in that sort of reactionary phase of we need to fix things, and that's completely understandable. I think the thing that's helped here at Silk Road is it's not just a tech solution and delivery company. The whole side of what we do that's got really quite busy and very sort of timely that we've had the service available to us is a lot more around the strategic services part of what we do. So that's advising on, here is how X customer over here has overcome getting 1,000 people to work from home, or having 50 countries all in their different working environments, and then sort of building a strategy for people. And if that involves solutions as well, then great. And if it doesn't, then that's also fine. So the strategic services part of what we do has been probably, and for me personally as well, that's been the biggest difference in terms of how we've been able to engage with not just new customers, but also existing ones. So for those who have always used us for various different things, it's actually sort of those who are starting to think about, okay, when we go into next year, and hopefully when we start to bring people back into a working environment, say they're a 10,000 employee multinational organization, how do we make an experience that's similar to onboarding, but how do we physically welcome those people back into a working environment without disrupting everything again? Because everyone's sort of getting used to this now. But how do we then take them out of this situation and back into a physical environment, a comfortable experience? So we're engaging in those sorts of conversations around reboarding of people, around how do we take those areas of our organizations with higher levels of risk. If we've got lots of very highly qualified people with very set knowledge around what they do, there's now a lot of concern around actually how do we make sure that other people have shared that knowledge as well. So having lots of conversations like that we perhaps wouldn't have expected to have, as you said a minute ago, when people think about Silk Road, they think about, oh, they're the onboarding people. It's been a lot more wider than that. So being able to combine the performance, the learning, and the strategic part of what we do, that's really been the biggest difference since March. I would imagine, I don't know, because to be fair, you've not been at Silver Cloud for that long, but are you seeing similar conversations starting to happen, or how is it there?
Yeah, I think for us, because we're sort of slightly more generalist in terms of the wider HR and payroll solutions or projects that we support, what we found is that we're not just focusing on like nuts and bolts HR payroll now. We are focusing on some more strategic peripheral projects which do focus on talent management, onboarding, e-learning resources, all that kind of space really, where people have realized that it has to be more than transactional. So it's kind of moved us into a slight niche area, if you like, of HR, which is interesting. And I guess what it's done on a general basis is we found it, once people got over that shock, which is really interesting, once you get out of that rabbit caught in headlights moments, I think it actually accelerated a lot of projects that people were looking to do and not have been on the top of their list, but now they realize that when it comes to people-based technology in whatever area that might be, they've had to accelerate that. So yes, we've been helping organizations, with those projects that traditionally might have been next year, which is really interesting. And like you've sort of touched on, Mike, we don't know when this is going to end, and when we all go back into the office, it could be that that's as much as a year. We could find ourselves going back into the office if we're lucky next March, and that's a year where we've had to completely change our habits, the way that we engage, the way that we learn, the way that we work. And so that reboarding piece, I think, is really, really interesting. I mean, I haven't gotten a train for 7 months, so I've got to learn how to catch a train.
It's very eerie.
Or work train line.
We had literally one day, so I have physically met my team, which is something.
Yeah.
In that brief period where the guidance was to go and work physically for a little while, we did manage that one day. But yeah, it's a very different experience, that's for sure. So yeah, hopefully not too long on that one.
I do remember I saw a post that you put on about 5 days into when you joined Silk Road, and you kind of, put a LinkedIn post and, sort of did allude to the fact that everyone had really welcomed you and that you had the technology in place to enable that. And I think at that time people were really interested about, how's someone else getting on when they're being onboarded?
It's a very weird experience. But to be fair now, it must be sort of between 7 and 8 months now since people, a lot of people in the UK and around the world will have been onboarded in this way.
Yeah. Of course.
So there will be people starting to evolve their thinking, say, okay, this isn't something we're going to have to run for 2 weeks. We are properly going to have to go with this. How can we make the best of it? So hopefully other people out there will have had their experiences sort of improve since the very early days anyway.
Yeah. Okay. So my final question now, Mike, is just more, or even more personal actually, is it's, we always talk about how we're all dealing with lockdown, not just for work, but at home and all that kind of stuff. And now that we're going into the second lockdown, that we're going to have to sort of rethink things again and get back into that almost that place psychologically that we were a couple of months ago before we came out of lockdown. So how are you personally coping with it, outside of work? I know you've bought some, or you've rescued or bought some kittens, so pets are always good for well-being, right?
But no, they've been great fun to keep us with some things to focus on outside of work. So that's been really good and rewarding actually. But I think the thing is, around whether we're in lockdown or not in lockdown, realistically, we're all going to be in this environment for a period of time. And the thing that's really worked well for us is to separate as much as possible. I'm conscious I'm talking about this in my kitchen, the office area, and when the cats aren't in it, the home area, as much as possible. That's been really good. The absolute, from a starting a new organisation point of view, how would that be better done? Could someone make the best out of that? Is to make sure that you've got everything you need to make it a personal experience. So this could even be advice for organisations who are setting up those experiences as well, to make sure, even though realistically you're not going to personalise an onboarding experience every single time that it happens, as long as the person who's going through that feels like it's a personalised experience, so they've got the right language, they've got the right people to talk to, all of that sort of thing is there at their fingertips, and that's going to give them the confidence, even when the world is as it is at the moment, to be able to go and do what they do to the best of their ability. That's the ultimate key. And for someone who's going to go through this experience, or maybe starting to go through this experience, is don't, I think, put too much sort of expectation on yourself, because sometimes there's that feeling of, have I really sort of contributed enough today in this environment? And actually, when you look at what you're doing versus all that time that you used to spend traveling, versus all of that time you used to get distracted by noise, by socializing with people outside of work. And actually, when you look at the time you spend on your productivity, I think people will probably be quite surprised about how much they are getting done in this environment. It's very easy to look at it in a negative way, because as soon as you look on anything news or social media wise, it's doom and gloom. Actually, if you can look at what you've done today and say, actually, look, I've actually done quite a good job there, people need to be more, I think anyway, a bit more giving themselves a bit more credit for that side of things too.
And that's really useful. I mean, it is about giving yourself a break and patting yourself on the back, and also naturally, although we all do miss socializing with colleagues or even people we don't know through meetings, we're in sales, so we like doing all that stuff and we like being out and about, and that's obviously all gone now. But I think you do get a huge amount of time back, and you can plow that back into being more productive, but at the same time, you're getting more time with your family and your loved ones, and I think you have to sort of, it's almost like it's a trade-off at the moment, and make the most of the trade-off, I think. And I do take on board what you say about once you shut the door on the office, even if it's the spare bedroom. I'm in my son's bedroom at the moment. You try and close the door psychologically on it, and then think, right, that's it, it's tomorrow's another day. But there is that, obviously, that temptation just to check that email and not switch off. So I think that's really key. But yeah, no, this is really useful, and it's so nice to catch up, mate. And
100%. And it's even in these strangest of times, it's from my point of view, it's great to see you back in the world of HCM, doing what you do. So thank you for
shut up.
all this good stuff.
Great. And as we say, whenever we meet up, I can't wait till we can have a drink in a pub and talk properly. But at the moment, it's all virtual
for now.
Yeah. All right then. Well, listen, mate. Take care. All the best. Lovely to speak to you. Cheers, mate.
Man.
Bye.